Harold Lawson stepped out of the warm morning sun and into the cafe with a familiar sense of quiet satisfaction. This cafe, with its tiny corner tables and wide windows overlooking the bustling street, was his cherished retreat. For years it had been his little oasis, a place where he and his late wife, Marie, would meet every Sunday morning, laughing and savoring their coffee and pastries. Even now, long after Marie's passing, he kept up the tradition, finding solace in the well-worn booth by the window. Today, though, there was a different air about the place. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of espresso, and the walls, once decorated with community art, had been replaced with minimalist decor. The cafe had changed hands recently, swept up in the tide of gentrification that transformed the neighborhood. But Harold clung to it all the same. He approached the counter, cane in one hand and an old newspaper tucked under his arm, intending to order his usual. Behind the counter stood a young barista, his face set in a distracted, indifferent expression. Harold recognized him as a new hire, Jake, he thought his name was. The boy was thin, with a head of messy hair, and a look that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Jake barely glanced up when Harold reached the counter. Harold cleared his throat politely. "Morning. I'll have a coffee, black, and a slice of that blueberry pie, please." Jake didn't respond. Instead, he continued wiping down the counter, pretending not to notice him. Harold waited, giving the young man a chance, but after a few moments it was clear that Jake was deliberately ignoring him. Undeterred, Harold repeated his order, this time a bit louder, though his tone remained warm. "Excuse me, young man? Black coffee and blueberry pie, please?" Jake finally looked up, his expression a mix of annoyance and disdain. He sized up Harold, his eyes lingering a little too long on Harold's worn coat and the old-fashioned hat perched on his head. With a barely concealed sneer, he muttered, "Sure, if you're sure you can afford it." The comment stung, but Harold forced himself to keep his expression steady. He was used to subtle slights like this, though they never grew easier to brush off. He let the silence hang in the air, waiting for Jake to correct himself, but the barista just stared back, arms crossed defiantly. "Yes, I'm quite sure," Harold replied calmly, pulling out his wallet and placing a bill on the counter. Jake took the money with a dismissive flick of his fingers, not even bothering to give Harold his change. He dropped it carelessly into the register and went to make the coffee, slamming mugs and plates around louder than necessary, his whole demeanor radiating irritation. As Harold waited, he couldn't help but notice the glances from other patrons who had witnessed the exchange. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging awkward glances. Harold's cheeks flushed slightly, and he gripped his cane a bit tighter. He'd learned long ago that making a scene often led nowhere good, but the feeling of humiliation lingered. After what felt like an unnecessarily long wait, Jake finally placed a steaming cup of coffee and a slice of pie on the counter. He didn't bother to look at Harold as he set them down. "There you go. Enjoy." The words dripped with sarcasm. Harold took his plate and cup, murmuring a polite thank you out of habit, though the sentiment felt hollow. He made his way to his favorite table by the window, hoping that the view and the familiar taste of his coffee would help him regain his peace. But as he settled into his seat, he heard Jake call out, loud enough for the whole cafe to hear, "Just make sure not to spill anything. We try to keep this place clean now." The comment hung in the air like a bad smell, drawing even more attention to Harold. He kept his head down, focusing on his coffee, and trying to ignore the prickling heat of embarrassment crawling up his neck. He'd come here for a moment of quiet, of reflection. But instead, he felt like an outsider in a place that used to feel like home. As he sipped his coffee, his mind drifted to Marie. She had always been the one to diffuse situations with grace and humor. "Don't let the small minds ruin your big heart, Harry," she used to say, squeezing his hand whenever someone made an offhand comment or gave them a disparaging look. Her memory brought him a flicker of warmth, and he straightened a bit in his seat, resolving to finish his meal and leave without further incident. But Jake wasn't done. A few moments later, he approached Harold's table, a sour look on his face as he leaned over the table. "You know, we have a dress code now," he said, his voice dripping with contempt as he looked pointedly at Harold's coat and hat. "Can't just let anyone sit here." Harold set down his cup, the initial sting of embarrassment hardening into a quiet resolve. He looked up at Jake, his gaze steady, and for a moment Jake faltered, seeming almost taken aback by the strength in Harold's eyes. "I've been coming to this cafe for years," Harold said softly, his voice firm. "Long before you started working here." Jake rolled his eyes, barely listening. "Well, times change. You should find somewhere else if you don't like it." The blatant disrespect was startling, even for someone as accustomed to subtle slights as Harold was. He took a slow breath, feeling his patience wearing thin. Part of him wanted to snap back to put this young man in his place, but he kept his composure, instead focusing on his coffee and pie, ignoring the prickling feeling of judgment in the air. Other patrons continued to watch, some with sympathy, others with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. One young woman at a nearby table whispered to her friend, both of them glancing over at Harold with looks of quiet disapproval directed toward Jake. But no one said anything. They all watched, silent witnesses to the quiet cruelty unfolding in front of them. Jake's harassment continued sporadically as Harold finished his meal. Each time he tried to enjoy a bite or sip his coffee, Jake would pass by with another remark, each one more condescending than the last. Harold maintained his calm, keeping his gaze fixed on the street outside, focusing on the memory of his Sunday mornings with Marie, her laughter, her gentle hand on his arm. He clung to that memory, letting it ground him through each moment of indignity. Finally, he finished his pie and took the last sip of his coffee. The taste, once comforting, now felt bitter. He folded his napkin and prepared to leave, determined to maintain his dignity despite the hostility he'd endured. As he rose from his seat, he glanced around the cafe, taking in the curious stares, the quiet judgment. He straightened his coat and adjusted his hat, standing tall despite the heaviness in his heart. As he approached the door, a young woman, one of the onlookers from earlier, stood up, seemingly unable to hold back any longer. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice low but kind. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry you were treated that way. It's not right." Harold gave her a small, appreciative nod, his expression softening. "Thank you," he replied quietly. "I appreciate that." With that, he turned and left the cafe, his steps steady but his mind racing. As Harold stepped out of the cafe, he felt the cold air hit his face, a sharp contrast to the heated frustration still simmering inside him. He walked slowly down the sidewalk, trying to shake off the experience, but the bitterness lingered. The cafe had always been a special place, a sanctuary, and now that same space felt foreign and hostile, transformed by the arrogance of a young man who seemed to view him as nothing more than a nuisance. Harold found himself replaying the encounter in his mind, each slight a fresh sting. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to let it go. After all, he'd faced far greater challenges in his life. As a decorated military officer, he had dealt with situations that required far more resilience than this. Yet somehow, the pettiness of the encounter cut deeper than he'd expected. After a few blocks, he stopped to catch his breath, resting against the railing of a small park nearby. A group of children ran by, laughing, their carefree joy reminding him of simpler times. Watching them, Harold felt his frustration slowly start to dissipate. He had dedicated his life to protecting people, to serving his community and his country. And in his retirement, he had hoped to continue contributing, albeit in a quieter way. Investing in local businesses like this cafe was his way of staying connected, of giving back. As the children's laughter faded, Harold's mind turned to the new manager he had recently hired, Laura. He had met her a few weeks ago, impressed by her dedication and vision for the cafe. She was a young woman with a keen sense of community and a commitment to preserving the neighborhood's history, even amid the wave of gentrification that was changing everything. Harold had trusted her with the day-to-day operations, confident that she would help the cafe remain a place of warmth and welcome. He glanced at his watch, realizing it was almost time for his meeting with Laura. Today was meant to be a low-key introduction, an opportunity for her to formally welcome him to the cafe as the new owner. Little did she know he'd been coming here long before he'd ever considered buying the place. He'd intentionally kept his identity quiet, wanting to get a sense of how things operated without any fanfare. Now, it seemed, his discretion had set the stage for a much-needed conversation. With a renewed sense of purpose, Harold turned back toward the cafe. This time, he walked with a steady determination, his stride firm and purposeful. He wasn't going to let one disrespectful employee define the atmosphere of a place that meant so much to him. The cafe had always been a symbol of the community's resilience, and if he had any say in it, it would remain that way. When he reached the cafe, he paused for a moment outside, gathering his thoughts. Through the large glass window, he could see Laura standing near the counter, talking to Jake. The young man looked tense, his usual smug demeanor replaced with a nervous fidgeting. Harold took a deep breath, preparing himself for the conversation ahead. He knew this would require a careful balance of authority and compassion. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of coffee greeted him, mixed with the faint undertone of fresh paint. As he entered, Laura spotted him and immediately broke into a warm smile. She hurried over, her face lit with excitement and respect. "Mr. Lawson," she greeted him enthusiastically, extending her hand. "It's such an honor to finally meet you in person. Thank you so much for investing in this place. We're really excited to make your vision come to life." Harold shook her hand, his gaze steady but kind. Thank you, Laura. I'm glad to be here. This cafe holds a lot of memories for me, and I'm grateful to have someone as passionate as you leading the way. Laura's eyes sparkled with appreciation. She gestured toward the seating area. Would you like to sit down? I thought we could discuss some of the plans we've been working on. Harold nodded, but before he could follow her, Jake approached, looking visibly uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, his eyes flickering nervously between Harold and Laura. The young man seemed to have pieced together the truth, and the realization was clearly weighing on him. Laura introduced them, unaware of the tension from earlier. Mr. Lawson, this is Jake. He's one of our baristas. Jake, meet Mr. Lawson, he's the new owner of the cafe. Jake swallowed, his face paling as he forced a strained smile. Nice to meet you, sir. Harold returned the gaze, his eyes cool and unwavering. We've met already, he replied, his voice calm but firm. Laura looked between them, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Sensing the unease, she quickly recovered, gesturing toward a table. Shall we sit? I'd love to go over some of the improvements we're planning. They moved to a nearby table, and Harold took a seat, his mind already formulating the words he needed to say. Jake lingered awkwardly by the counter, watching with a mixture of apprehension and regret. Harold knew he would have to address the situation, but he didn't want to undermine Laura's authority in front of her team. For now, he would keep the conversation focused on the cafe's future. As they settled in, Laura began outlining her ideas, her enthusiasm infectious. She spoke about community outreach events, potential collaborations with local artists, and plans to honor the cafe's long history in the neighborhood. Harold listened intently, impressed by her dedication and vision. This was exactly the kind of energy he wanted for the cafe, a commitment to the people and the place. After a few minutes, however, Harold held up a hand, signaling for her to pause. I appreciate everything you're doing, Laura, he began, choosing his words carefully. But there's something we need to address before we go any further. Laura's expression turned serious, her gaze attentive. Of course, Mr. Lawson. What's on your mind? Harold glanced over at Jake, who was still hovering near the counter, looking increasingly uncomfortable. I had an interesting experience this morning when I came in, Harold said, his tone even. Jake here made it quite clear that he didn't think I belonged here. He went out of his way to make me feel unwelcome. Laura's eyes widened in surprise, her gaze darting to Jake. I'm so sorry, Mr. Lawson. I had no idea. Harold raised a hand, stopping her. I know you didn't, and that's why I'm bringing it up now. This cafe has always been a place of warmth and acceptance. It's why I chose to invest in it. I want to make sure that everyone, regardless of who they are, feels that same welcome. Jake looked down, his face flushed with embarrassment. Sir, I didn't know. Harold fixed him with a steady gaze. It shouldn't matter whether you knew who I was. Every person who walks through those doors deserves respect. Your job is to serve, and that means leaving judgment and prejudice at the door. The silence in the cafe was thick, the weight of Harold's words sinking in. Laura looked genuinely horrified, clearly disappointed in Jake's behavior. She turned to him, her voice firm. Jake, this is unacceptable. Our mission here is to create a welcoming environment for everyone. I expect you to uphold that standard. Jake shifted uncomfortably, nodding. I understand. I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson. It won't happen again. Harold watched him for a moment, considering. He knew that people could change, but it took accountability and a willingness to grow. He hoped Jake would take this as a lesson, not just an apology. Actions speak louder than words, Harold said finally. I hope you'll remember that. Laura looked at Harold, gratitude and respect in her eyes. Thank you for addressing this, Mr. Lawson. I promise I'll make sure the staff understands the values we want to uphold here. Harold nodded, feeling a sense of closure settle over him. The cafe had weathered a small storm today, but he could see that Laura was more than capable of steering it back on course. He gave her a reassuring smile. I have full confidence in you, Laura. I know you'll do what's right. She smiled, visibly relieved. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I won't let you down. As they continued their conversation, the air in the cafe seemed to lighten. Harold could feel a shift, as if the place itself had responded to his quiet insistence on respect and integrity. He looked around, noticing how the other patrons seemed to settle back into their routines, the earlier tension now a memory. As they discussed the future plans, Harold felt a renewed sense of optimism. This cafe was more than just a business to him, it was a place where memories were made, where people came together. And under Laura's guidance, he was certain it would continue to be a cornerstone of the community. He stood to leave, his heart lighter than it had been that morning. Harold knew there would be challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them, confident that he had made the right choice in both his investment and the people he entrusted with it. With a final nod to Laura, he made his way toward the door, his mind already turning to the possibilities for the cafe's future. As Harold left the cafe that day, he felt an undeniable sense of satisfaction. Though the morning had started with frustration and hurt, he'd found a way to reaffirm the values he held dear, not only for himself but for the entire community. Yet, he couldn't quite shake the memory of Jake's actions. Harold believed in second chances, but he also knew the importance of accountability. He'd lived long enough to understand that if no one held people responsible for their behavior, those behaviors would only continue unchecked. In the days that followed, Harold became a more frequent presence at the cafe, slipping in at different times to observe how the staff interacted with customers. Laura had taken his words to heart, and he noticed small changes right away. She'd implemented new policies to foster an inclusive and respectful environment, making sure each employee was aware of the cafe's commitment to the community. She'd also quietly taken Jake aside for additional training, emphasizing customer service and respect. Harold admired her gentle but firm approach and could see she was determined to make this place the warm, welcoming haven it was meant to be. However, he noticed that Jake's attitude hadn't completely transformed. Though more subdued, Jake still harbored an air of impatience, especially with customers he deemed less important by his own standards. He made an effort to be polite when Laura was around, but when he thought no one was watching, the subtle edge of arrogance slipped back into his mannerisms. Harold could see that, while Jake's behavior had improved on the surface, the lesson hadn't truly sunk in. One afternoon, Harold decided it was time to take matters a step further. He asked Laura to call a staff meeting and invited the entire team to join, making it clear that he wanted everyone present, including Jake. Laura agreed, curious but supportive, sensing that Harold had a plan in mind. She respected his insight and wisdom and trusted him to guide the cafe in the right direction. The next day, the staff gathered in the cafe's cozy back room, a space usually reserved for private events and planning sessions. The team sat in a loose circle, with Laura and Harold standing at the front. Harold took a moment to look around, his gaze warm yet commanding. He had always believed that leadership wasn't about intimidation or control, but about inspiring those around you to be their best selves. He wanted to instill that sense of purpose and integrity in every member of this team. "Thank you all for coming," Harold began, his voice steady and calm. "I wanted to take this opportunity to speak with you about the cafe's future, and what we hope to build here together. As some of you may know, I've been coming to this cafe for years, long before I had any ownership stake in it. This place means a great deal to me, not just as a business, but as part of our community." He paused, letting his words sink in. The staff members listened intently, sensing that this was more than just a routine meeting. "When I invested in this cafe, I didn't do it simply as a financial venture. I did it because I believe in what this cafe represents. It's a place where people from all walks of life can come together, where every person who walks through those doors should feel respected and valued." His gaze traveled across the faces in the room, lingering on Jake for a moment before moving on. "I've noticed some improvements recently, and I'm grateful to each of you for your hard work. But there's something I want all of you to understand deeply," he continued, his tone becoming more serious. "Respect is not just a rule or a policy. It's the foundation of everything we do here. How we treat people matters, whether they're regulars, new customers, or simply passing through. We may not know their stories or their struggles, but they deserve our kindness and respect just the same." A murmur of agreement ran through the group, though Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding Harold's gaze. "To illustrate what I mean," Harold said, his voice softening, "I'd like to share a story. Years ago, when I was serving in the military, I had a superior who treated everyone under him with respect, no matter their rank or background. He used to say, 'A soldier's worth is in his integrity, not his status.' That lesson has stayed with me ever since. And now, I want to pass it on to all of you." Laura smiled, clearly moved by Harold's words, and the other staff members looked inspired, nodding in agreement. But Harold wasn't finished. He turned his attention directly to Jake, his gaze firm but not unkind. "Jake," he said, "I know you've had some challenges adapting to this job. It's not easy to serve people day in and day out, but I want you to understand that every person who walks in here is someone's loved one. They're all worthy of the same respect you'd hope to receive yourself." Jake looked down, his face flushed, but he managed a stiff nod. Harold could see that the young man was struggling, but he hoped that his words had reached him on some level. As the meeting concluded, Harold thanked everyone for their time and encouraged them to keep up the good work. He could see a renewed sense of purpose in their faces, a willingness to embrace the cafe's mission. As the team dispersed, Laura approached Harold, her expression a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "Mr. Lawson, I can't thank you enough for speaking to the team. I think they really needed to hear that," she said, her voice sincere. Harold nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Sometimes, all it takes is a reminder of what really matters. As the weeks passed, Harold continued his regular visits, and he was pleased to see a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The cafe had begun to feel like a true community space again, filled with warmth and kindness. Customers seemed more at ease, and the staff more engaged and genuine in their interactions. Even Jake's demeanor had softened somewhat. He still struggled at times, but Harold noticed he was making an effort, catching himself before he let impatience or judgment slip into his tone. One morning, as Harold sat in his usual spot by the window, he saw Jake approach with a fresh cup of coffee. To Harold's surprise, Jake set the cup down with a tentative smile. "Black coffee, just like you like it," Jake said, his voice almost shy. Harold looked up, nodding his thanks. "Thank you, Jake." There was a pause, and then Jake spoke, his tone hesitant but sincere. "Mr. Lawson, I wanted to apologize for how I acted before. I didn't realize how important this place was to you or to the community. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Harold studied Jake's face, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. He could tell that Jake was grappling with genuine remorse, and Harold respected that the young man had the courage to admit his mistake. "Apology accepted," Harold said kindly. "It takes strength to acknowledge when we're wrong. Remember, Jake, it's never too late to make a change." Jake nodded, visibly relieved, and excused himself to continue his work. Harold watched him go, feeling a sense of closure. It seemed that Jake had finally understood the lesson Harold had hoped to impart. People could change, given the right guidance and encouragement. As Harold sipped his coffee, he reflected on how much this experience had deepened his connection to the cafe and its community. It wasn't just a place to him, it was a symbol of resilience, kindness, and the power of respect. And now he was more determined than ever to preserve that spirit. A few days later, Laura surprised Harold with a framed photograph she'd found while sorting through old cafe memorabilia. It was an image of Harold and Marie from years ago, sitting in that very cafe booth, laughing over coffee. Seeing the picture brought a lump to his throat, and he gently traced the edges of the frame, the memory filling him with warmth. "We thought it would be nice to hang it up," Laura said softly, "a reminder of what this place is all about." Harold smiled, touched beyond words. "Thank you, Laura. This means more than you know." They found a spot on the wall near his regular table, and as they hung the photograph, Harold felt a sense of peace settle over him. This cafe, with all its memories and challenges, was now a part of his legacy. It was a place where people could come together, a sanctuary for all. And as he looked around, Harold knew that he had succeeded in creating something that would outlast him, a community bound by respect, kindness, and the enduring power of connection. The cafe had transformed over the past few months. Harold's influence was visible in every corner, from the walls decorated with local art to the warm, friendly atmosphere that greeted customers the moment they walked in. It had become more than just a coffee shop, it was a community hub, a place where people of all backgrounds could feel comfortable and connected. Laura's leadership had brought Harold's vision to life, and the cafe was thriving in ways it never had before. Harold had noticed that even Jake seemed to be finding his place. He had taken Harold's words to heart, working diligently to improve his attitude and service. Though he still had moments of impatience, they were rare, and Harold could see the effort Jake was making. The young man had begun greeting regulars by name, chatting with customers, and engaging in small acts of kindness that made a difference. Harold respected Jake's growth and was pleased to see him evolving into a more considerate and compassionate person. One Saturday morning, Harold arrived at the cafe a bit earlier than usual. He had decided to bring in a few old books to donate to the cafe's reading shelf, a small collection of novels and magazines that patrons could enjoy while sipping their coffee. As he entered, he was greeted by the warm hum of conversation and the comforting aroma of fresh pastries and coffee. He spotted Laura at the counter, supervising the morning rush, her face lit with a sense of calm authority. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson," Laura called out, smiling brightly as he approached. "Early start today?" Harold chuckled, placing the books on the counter. "Figured I'd drop these off for the reading shelf. Thought some folks might enjoy them." Laura beamed. "Thank you. People love the shelf. It's become a popular spot." She took the books and set them aside, promising to organize them later. As Harold moved toward his usual table by the window, he noticed Jake serving a couple seated nearby. The young man seemed relaxed, even smiling as he handed them their drinks, and made a light-hearted comment that earned a laugh. Harold felt a sense of pride, watching the transformation that had taken place over the months. Jake had come a long way, and though it hadn't been an easy journey, he had proven that change was possible. As Harold settled into his seat, he caught snippets of conversation around him. Patrons were discussing local events, swapping stories, and sharing plans for the weekend. The cafe had truly become a place where connections were made, where neighbors became friends, and where people felt at home. Harold felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had played a role in creating this environment. He was lost in thought when he noticed a young couple entering the cafe, looking slightly out of place. They were dressed in business attire, their expressions serious as they surveyed the room. Laura noticed them too and approached with her usual welcoming smile. "Good morning, welcome to the cafe. Can I help you with anything?" she asked, her tone warm and friendly. The man nodded curtly. "Yes, we're here on behalf of the property management company. We're conducting an assessment of the building and the surrounding area." Laura's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course. Is there anything specific you're looking for?" The woman pulled out a clipboard, glancing around the cafe with a critical eye. "We're evaluating the potential for redevelopment. This area has been flagged for possible improvements, which may involve some changes to current businesses." Harold felt a chill run down his spine. He listened intently, his heart sinking as he realized what this meant. The neighborhood had been undergoing rapid changes over the past few years, with new developments cropping up and small businesses being pushed out to make way for larger, more profitable ventures. He had hoped that the cafe, with its strong community ties, might be spared. But now it seemed that even this cherished space was at risk. Laura, visibly concerned, glanced at Harold, who gave her a reassuring nod. She turned back to the couple, her voice calm but firm. "This cafe has been a part of the community for years. It's not just a business, it's a place where people gather, where neighbors come together. I hope that's something you'll take into consideration." The man offered a thin smile. "We understand, but we have to evaluate all factors. It's ultimately up to the property owners to decide what's best for the area." With that, they moved on, continuing their assessment as they made notes and took photographs. Harold watched them go, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. He knew that the cafe's future might now be out of his control, but he wasn't willing to give up without a fight. After the couple left, Laura joined Harold at his table, her expression troubled. "Mr. Lawson, what are we going to do? If they decide to redevelop, we could lose everything we've worked so hard to build." Harold took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had faced difficult situations before, but this felt different. This was about more than just a business, it was about preserving a space that had become a lifeline for the community. "We're not going to let them take this place without a fight," he said firmly. "We've built something special here, something worth protecting, and I believe the community will stand with us." Laura nodded, her resolve strengthening. "You're right. This cafe means too much to too many people. We'll do whatever it takes to keep it." Over the next few days, Harold and Laura began reaching out to the community, rallying support for the cafe. They organized a petition gathering signatures from loyal patrons and local residents who wanted to see the cafe preserved. They also reached out to local media, sharing the story of the cafe and its importance to the neighborhood. The response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life came forward, sharing stories of how the cafe had touched their lives and offering their support. Jake, too, stepped up in ways Harold hadn't anticipated. He became one of the cafe's most vocal advocates, speaking passionately to customers about the need to protect the space and encouraging everyone he knew to sign the petition. Harold watched with pride as Jake threw himself into the effort, his dedication evident in every word he spoke. The young man had come full circle, embracing the values Harold had hoped to instill in him. As the campaign gained momentum, Harold received a call from a local news station requesting an interview. They wanted to highlight the cafe's story and its fight to remain open. Harold agreed, hoping that the media coverage would bring even more attention to their cause. On the day of the interview, the cafe was filled with reporters and camera crews, along with regular customers who had come to show their support. Harold spoke about the cafe's history, its role in the community, and his vision for its future. He shared stories of the people who frequented the cafe, emphasizing the connections and relationships that had been forged within its walls. The response was powerful. The community rallied even harder, and donations began pouring in to support the cafe. People who had moved away sent messages of encouragement, and local businesses offered to collaborate on events and fundraisers. The cafe had become a symbol of resistance, a testament to the strength of a community united in purpose. A week later, Harold received an unexpected visit from one of the representatives from the property management company. The man looked uncomfortable as he approached Harold, his usual air of authority tempered with a newfound humility. "Mr. Lawson," he began, "I wanted to speak with you personally. I've seen the response from the community, and I must admit, it's impressive. It's clear that this cafe is more than just a business." Harold studied him, sensing a shift in his tone. This cafe has always been more than just a business. It's a part of the neighborhood's identity, a place where people come together. I hope that's something you'll consider as you move forward. The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We're willing to reconsider our plans. We understand now that preserving this space could benefit the community as much as any new development. We'll be discussing options with the property owners. But I wanted you to know that your efforts have made a difference." Relief washed over Harold, and he felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond words. He thanked the man, shaking his hand firmly, and watched as he left. The cafe had won a hard-fought victory, one that reaffirmed the power of community and the impact of standing up for what mattered. In the days that followed, life at the cafe returned to its comforting rhythm. The regulars came and went, sharing stories and laughter, enjoying the familiar warmth of a place they had almost lost. Harold continued his daily visits, each one a reminder of the hard work and dedication that had gone into preserving this sanctuary. Jake, now a transformed young man, approached Harold one day with a look of admiration. "Mr. Lawson," he said, his voice filled with gratitude, "I want to thank you for everything. For giving me a second chance, for teaching me what it means to respect others. I don't think I'll ever forget what you've done for this place, and for me." Harold smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Jake, you've earned your place here. You've shown that people can grow, that change is possible. Just remember to carry that lesson with you, wherever you go." As Harold watched Jake return to his work, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had saved more than just a cafe, he had helped shape a new generation, instilling values that would ripple outward, touching lives in ways he might never see. The cafe stood as a testament to resilience, kindness, and the enduring strength of community. And Harold knew that, as long as it remained, it would continue to serve as a beacon of hope and connection, a place where every person was valued, respected, and welcomed with open arms. Months passed, and Harold continued to watch the cafe flourish. What had once been a modest business had now become a symbol of community resilience, celebrated by locals and newcomers alike. The campaign to save the cafe had not only preserved it but had also strengthened its identity, transforming it into a gathering place for events, workshops, and celebrations that brought people together. One chilly autumn afternoon, Harold entered the cafe to find it bustling with activity. The air was filled with the aroma of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the quiet hum of conversation and laughter. People crowded around tables, wrapped in scarves and jackets, sipping hot drinks and chatting warmly. A new art exhibit from a local painter adorned the walls, and Harold took a moment to appreciate the vibrant colors that added a unique charm to the cozy space. Laura spotted him from behind the counter, her face lighting up as she waved him over. He walked up to her, noting how seamlessly she moved between customers, her presence calm and reassuring. Over the months, Laura had blossomed in her role, becoming not just the manager but the heart of the cafe. "Mr. Lawson," she greeted him, her smile as warm as ever. "You came just in time. We have a little surprise for you." Harold raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A surprise? I didn't know I was expecting one." She chuckled and gestured for him to follow her toward the back of the cafe, where the staff had gathered around a large, covered object. Jake was among them, looking unusually excited, and Harold noticed several familiar faces from the community, all grinning in anticipation. Laura glanced at the group, then turned to Harold, her expression filled with affection and pride. "We wanted to do something to thank you for everything you've done, not just for the cafe, but for all of us." She reached out, pulling away the cloth that had covered the mysterious object, revealing a beautifully crafted plaque. It read, "In honor of Harold Lawson, for his unwavering dedication to community, kindness, and integrity." Below the inscription was a photograph of Harold and Marie, sitting together in the cafe many years ago, laughing over coffee, just as they had every Sunday morning. Harold felt a lump rise in his throat, and for a moment he was speechless, his gaze fixed on the photograph. "We wanted to honor you, Mr. Lawson," Laura said softly, her voice carrying the emotion that filled the room. "You saved this cafe, you gave us a place to belong, and you taught us the importance of respect and kindness. This plaque is our way of saying thank you." Harold took a shaky breath, his eyes glistening. He looked around at the faces gathered around him: Laura, Jake, the regular patrons, the local artists, and members of the community who had come to appreciate the cafe as much as he did. Each face held gratitude, respect, and a genuine warmth that touched him deeply. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you'll ever know. This cafe, it's not just a place to me. It's a home. And all of you have made it that way." There was a round of applause, and people came forward to shake his hand, to share stories of how the cafe had impacted their lives. Harold listened to each one, his heart swelling with pride and joy. The cafe had grown into something far greater than he'd ever imagined: a sanctuary for people to connect, to share, and to find solace. As the crowd began to disperse, Jake approached him, looking slightly nervous but determined. Over the past few months, Jake had transformed significantly, and Harold had come to see the young man's growth as one of the most rewarding outcomes of his time at the cafe. "Mr. Lawson," Jake began, his voice steady but sincere, "I want to thank you too. I know I didn't start off on the right foot, but you gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. I've learned a lot from you, more than I ever expected, and I just wanted to say thank you." Harold smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. "You've come a long way, Jake. We all make mistakes, but it's what we do afterward that defines us. You should be proud of the person you're becoming." Jake nodded, visibly moved. It was clear that Harold's words carried a weight that went beyond simple advice. They were an affirmation, a reminder that people could grow, learn, and become better, no matter where they started. As the afternoon turned into evening, the cafe remained lively, filled with the buzz of conversation and the warmth of shared memories. Harold lingered, watching as people moved around, laughing and chatting, finding comfort in the welcoming space they had all helped to build. At one point, Laura joined him by the window, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him, her expression thoughtful as she looked around the bustling room. "This place has become everything we dreamed of, hasn't it?" she mused, her gaze filled with contentment. Harold nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "It has, and it's because of people like you, people who believe in the power of community." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the cafe's patrons as they shared stories, laughter, and companionship. Harold felt a deep sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that filled every corner of his being. This cafe, with all its challenges and triumphs, had become more than he could have ever hoped for. As the evening wore on, Harold rose to leave, saying his goodbyes to Laura and the staff. He stepped outside, the cool night air refreshing, as he began his walk home. The city lights twinkled above him, casting a soft glow over the streets as he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. In the weeks that followed, the cafe continued to thrive, a beacon of resilience and community spirit. Harold watched as new faces joined the regular crowd, each person finding a place of warmth and belonging within its walls. The cafe had become more than just a business. It was a testament to the enduring power of kindness, respect, and the bonds that held people together. And as Harold looked to the future, he knew that the cafe would continue to flourish, long after he was gone. It was a legacy he was proud to leave behind, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that transformed lives. The cafe continued to thrive as the beating heart of the community. Over the years, it had become a beloved fixture in the neighborhood, a place where memories were created and relationships blossomed. For Harold, it was not only a testament to his vision, but also a constant reminder of the values he and Marie had cherished throughout their lives: respect, kindness, and community. As he grew older, Harold took comfort in knowing that the cafe would carry on, that it would remain a sanctuary for generations to come. One sunny afternoon, Harold sat in his favorite spot by the window, watching the steady flow of patrons come and go. His presence had become something of a tradition for the cafe's regulars. Customers would greet him warmly, many stopping to share a few words or reminisce about their first encounters with the cafe. Harold had watched friendships, romances, and even small businesses form within these walls. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had helped foster an environment where such things could flourish. Laura had since expanded her role, taking on responsibilities that reached beyond day-to-day management. Her tireless dedication had been instrumental in shaping the cafe into the community hub it was now. She had organized local art exhibitions, poetry readings, and even small concerts in the evenings, events that brought in new faces and infused the cafe with a vibrant artistic energy. Jake, too, had come into his own. Once a young man brimming with impatience and a chip on his shoulder, he had matured into one of the cafe's most valued staff members. Over time, he'd taken on more responsibilities, eventually being promoted to assistant manager under Laura's mentorship. His journey had been one of growth and redemption, and Harold could see the respect he now commanded among his peers. On this particular afternoon, as Harold sipped his coffee and watched the lively scene around him, Laura approached with a smile. She had a soft, thoughtful look in her eyes, and Harold sensed that she had something on her mind. "Mr. Lawson," she began, sitting across from him, "I wanted to talk to you about something important." He set down his cup, giving her his full attention. "Of course, Laura. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "I've been thinking about the future of the cafe. I know how much it means to you, and to all of us. And I wanted to ask if you would consider officially passing the ownership to me." Harold felt a pang of surprise, but it quickly gave way to a profound sense of understanding. He had known for some time that this day would come, that he would eventually need to entrust the cafe to someone who could carry its legacy forward, and he couldn't think of anyone more suited for the role than Laura. She continued, her voice filled with sincerity. "I love this place as much as you do, and I want to ensure it remains a home for the community. I would be honored to carry on what you and Marie started." Harold looked at her, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Laura, you've already been a steward of this place. You've given so much of yourself to the cafe and to the people who come here. It would be my privilege to pass it on to you." Laura's eyes glistened with emotion, and she reached out, squeezing his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I promise to honor everything you've built here." They spent the next few weeks finalizing the transition, with Harold walking Laura through the finer details of ownership and sharing the stories that had shaped the cafe's history. He recounted memories of his days there with Marie, of the struggles and triumphs that had marked the cafe's journey, and of the people who had come and gone, each leaving a lasting impact. Laura listened with reverence, taking in every detail, understanding that she was inheriting not just a business but a legacy. The official handover was held on a Saturday afternoon, a quiet, intimate event, attended by the cafe's closest friends and patrons. Harold watched as Laura formally took on the role, her expression a mix of excitement and resolve. She made a short speech, thanking Harold for his trust and promising to preserve the cafe's mission. The crowd erupted in applause, and Harold felt a bittersweet sense of closure. He knew that he had made the right choice, that Laura would honor the cafe's spirit and guide it into the future with grace. As the months rolled by, Harold gradually reduced his visits, choosing instead to enjoy the cafe from a distance. He watched with pride as Laura and Jake led the cafe, each bringing their unique strengths to the role. Jake's growth had been remarkable. He'd become a mentor to new staff, passing on the lessons he had learned under Harold's guidance. The young man had transformed into someone Harold admired deeply, a testament to the power of second chances. One autumn day, Harold sat alone on a park bench overlooking the cafe, reminiscing about the journey that had brought him here. He thought of Marie, of the years they had spent together, of the dreams they had shared. Though she was gone, he felt her presence in every corner of the cafe, in the laughter of its patrons, and in the warmth that filled its walls. She would have been proud, he thought, of what they had accomplished, of the lives they had touched. As he sat there, lost in thought, Jake appeared at his side, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He had spotted Harold from the cafe's window and had come to join him. "Mr. Lawson," Jake greeted him, handing over the cup, "I thought you might like some coffee. House blend just like you like it." Harold smiled, accepting the cup with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you, Jake. You didn't have to do that." Jake shrugged, taking a seat beside him. "You've done so much for me, for all of us. It's the least I could do." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee, watching the world go by. Harold glanced at Jake, feeling a sense of peace. He had always hoped that the cafe would inspire others, that it would be a place where people learned the value of kindness and respect. And in Jake, he saw the living proof of that legacy. After a few moments, Jake spoke, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Mr. Lawson, I just want you to know I don't think I'd be the person I am today if it weren't for you. This cafe, what you created here, it changed my life." Harold felt a surge of emotion, his chest tightening with pride and affection. "You changed your own life, Jake. I just gave you a nudge in the right direction. The rest was up to you." Jake smiled, his expression filled with gratitude. They sat together for a while longer, the silence between them a testament to the bond they had forged. Harold knew that his time with the cafe had come to an end, but he felt no sadness, only a deep, abiding satisfaction. The cafe was in good hands, and the values he had instilled would continue to guide it long after he was gone. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Harold rose, saying his goodbyes to Jake. He turned toward home, his steps slow but steady, his heart full. He had left behind a legacy that would endure, a place that would continue to welcome people from all walks of life, to offer them a sanctuary of kindness, respect, and community. And as he walked away, he knew that Marie would have been proud. The cafe was not just a business or a building, it was a symbol of everything they had stood for, a place where their love and values would live on. Years later, long after Harold's passing, the cafe remained a beloved landmark in the community. A new generation had taken over its stewardship, each person carrying forward the traditions and values that Harold had instilled. The plaque honoring Harold Lawson still hung on the wall, a reminder of the man who had saved the cafe and transformed it into a place of hope and belonging. People would often pause to read the inscription, to learn the story of the cafe's founder. And for those who had known him, the plaque was more than just a tribute. It was a testament to the enduring impact of a life well lived, to the power of kindness, and to the strength of a community bound by love and respect. The cafe continued to flourish, its doors always open to those in need of a warm meal, a friendly face, or simply a place to belong. And in the laughter, the conversations, and the quiet moments shared within its walls, Harold's legacy lived on, an eternal reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could change the world.